Hi everyone, this is Silver de la Rosa and again I welcome you to On Silver Screen, where learning is interesting. We are now at episode 8 of our procurement and tendering season, and today we will talk about the tender process, part 2. Please support this channel by hitting like on the video and sharing the video to your friends, especially those who are preparing for their APC. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified every time I upload a new video. Our objective for this discussion is to know the necessary actions to be undertaken during the submission of tenders, the receiving of tender offers. So what will be the proper way to open the tender and to record the tender that you have received. Also, we will talk about the reviewing of tenders. You have to check for the errors and conflicts, and what will you do when you found out that there are some errors or conflicts. Okay, first we will talk about the submission of tenders. How will the contractor submit their tender offer? The method of tender submission should be clearly set out in the instruction to tenderers documentation, which would include the date of submission, the time of submission, including the time zone, because it might be that you are holding an international project and your contractors are from different time zone, but the tender team are also from different time zones. So you must include the time zone. The location where the tender to be sent. If it is to be sent physically, then you must provide the address. And the name of the person whom the tender return should be addressed, who will receive the tender. And the method of submission. The tender documentation should clearly state how the tenders will be submitted. Will it be through email? Or is a hard copy required? Or will it be submitted to a web portal and so on? Now let's talk about receiving of tenders. What will the tender team do after they receive the tender returns submitted by the contractor? The method of receiving tenders should also be clearly set out in the instruction to tenderers documentation. It should clearly indicate that once the due date and time lapses, no other tender returns should be considered as part of the opening process. You have to take note that for public procurement projects, late tender submission should not be considered. This is to be observed strictly. While for private projects, clients should be advised which tenders are late, and the client should give explicit instruction should they still wish that the late tender be considered. So it is more lenient when it comes to private projects because the client has a final say. While for the public project, it is more difficult to get a consensus because the general public is your client. So that is why rules for public procurement projects should be observed strictly. Now, after the tender team had received all the tender returns from the tenderers, the next thing that will be done is to open the tender. And opening the tender should be carried out in the presence of another qualified construction professional to witness the opening. The client and other members of the design team should also be invited to tender opening. Now, after you have opened the tender, it should be recorded properly. So each tender should be opened, and submitted information should be noted in the tender opening form. The form will typically include records of the following information: the tender price, and the required breakdown. For example, if there is a need to break down the preliminaries, overheads, profit, and prime cost, depending on the project requirement. The proposed program, any key comments or exclusions, have they excluded or did not price anything from the schedule of works, any alternative tender offers, and a confirmation whether or not all documents have been submitted. When tenders have been opened, then the tender opening schedule should be signed and dated by all parties present, as this will eventually form part of the tender report. Let us take a look at the tender opening form. It should be noted that different organizations uses different tender opening form, and the content may vary depending on project's requirement. In general, the following information will be captured in the tender opening form. It should be clearly emphasized that the tender opening form should be handled with utmost confidentiality. It should only be for the eyes of the tender team and the client. The form will also contain project information such as project name, who is the client, and the tender opening date. The tenderers who submitted their offer will be listed, and in certain cases, even the name of the contractor who previously expressed their interest to tender but have not submitted their offer will be listed as well, particularly if selective tendering strategy is used. Then the price or the submitted price will be recorded. Depending on the project requirement, a breakdown of preliminaries, overhead, and profit can also be shown. Then the total price will be ranked from the lowest to highest. The first on the rank will be the lowest and the last will be the highest. Also, any remarks that the tender team had observed will be written in the remarks column. For example, if the submitted tender is complete, or is the submitted tender late, or some documents are missing. So these are only few of the remarks that can be observed during the tender opening. The form will be signed and dated by all parties present to witness the tender opening. And further action should also be noted. For example, a copy shall be furnished to the tender team or it is still subject to further assessment. Now, let us take a look at how to review tenders that you have received. Review and analysis of qualified tenders must be carried out diligently to maintain parity and ensure a like-for-like comparison. A copy of tender returns should be issued to all members of the tender team for their feedback and inputs. Generally, the review of tender returns will be comprised of the following: checking for errors and conflicts. So this involves the checking of the following prior to detailed analysis. So bear in mind that at this stage, we are only checking what you have received in surface. Detailed analysis will follow through. So you have to check for the completeness of the priced item. You have to perform arithmetical and logical checks. And you have to look out for obvious errors in program dates. Also, you have to look out for any qualifications that would render the tender null and void. And look out for any conflicts of interest. So after you have performed the checking for all these aspects and you found out that there are some errors, how are you going to deal with errors and conflicts on the submitted tender? The method of dealing with errors in the submitted tender should have been clearly outlined in the instruction to tenderers. The action to be taken in dealing with these errors will vary depending on the form and type of contract being used, but basic alternatives are straightforward. It is either corrections of the overall price are not permitted, or corrections are permitted. It is worth noting that if corrections of overall price are not permitted, then it may be inconsistent with partnering approach. Also, it may not be considered as appropriate for two-stage tendering procedures. Please visit my previous video about tendering strategies to understand why this alternative is not appropriate for a two-stage tendering strategy. On the other hand, if corrections are permitted, it should be noted that it can be open for abuse if not properly supervised. Let us deal with the arithmetical errors. Details of the errors or discrepancies should be given to tenderer, and an opportunity to confirm the price or withdraw from the process should be afforded to the tenderer. As discussed earlier, we have two alternatives in how to deal with errors. For arithmetical errors, let's discuss about alternative 1. Corrections of the overall price are not permitted. In this case, should the tenderer stands by his submitted price, an endorsement signed by both parties should be added to the price documents prior to acceptance. This will be part of the contract document. Then all the rates or prices in the tender shall be proportionately reduced or increased based on the corrected price, except for preliminaries, contingencies, prime cost, and provisional sums. Let us now deal with arithmetical errors if corrections are permitted. The tenderer should be given an opportunity to confirm his offer or correct the genuine errors. Note that corrections will only be allowed for the genuine errors. The tenderer has two options here. First, he can confirm the offer. If this option will be chosen, then an endorsement signed by both parties should be added to the price documents prior to acceptance. This will be part of the contract document. The procedure for adjustment to be undertaken are similar to option 1. And another option that the tenderer can choose is to amend the offer. The tenderer may be allowed to access the original tender offer and amend his tender figure and possibly certain rates and affix the initials on the corrected details. Or, confirmation of alterations will be made via letter, which will be part of the tender document when successful. Now, how about conflicts or issues? What are these conflicts or issues that you can find when you open the tender? If conflicts is discovered, then the tenderer must be notified as soon as possible to clarify the qualification or issue. So what are these issues? What are the type of issues that you can find? First, it can be conflict of interest. For example, the proposed subcontractors are not acceptable to the client or to the tender team. Probably the subcontractor is blacklisted. Also, another example is that the project staffing proposed by the tenderer. In some tenders, the tenderer is asked who will be the key personnel that we will put in the project. And this will be reviewed by the tender committee or the tender team. So if the proposed, let's say for example, project manager is not acceptable, then this issue should be raised to the contractor for them to choose to replace the key personnel. Another one is a tender qualifications. So normally the tenderers, when they do not agree with any conditions in the tender document, they will have some tender qualifications. For example, they may also put some unpriced item, or some items in the schedule of works they will put as NA or nil. Also, for the proposed program, for example, if the project is bound to be completed for 12 months, and in their tender offer, they put 18 months. So these are the things that you have to look out for and should be settled with the tenderer. So the tenderer must be made aware that if the conflict cannot be resolved, then they may be discounted from the tender process. So it must be made clearly that if this conflict cannot be settled, then they will be disqualified or their tender will not be accepted or it will be rejected. And if the issues can be resolved, then the tenderer must confirm the amendments in writing. So that's how to deal with conflicts and issues. Now, how about raising tender queries and conflicts in information? So if you find any conflicts in information, as a tender team, how are you going to raise these queries? What are the procedures in raising these queries? The tender returns should be reviewed by the entire tender team and design team to ensure that prices are reviewed in a like-for-like basis. A list of post-tender queries should be sent to each tenderer where additional clarification is required or where there is a conflict between information within tender return or where key information seem to be excluded. But you have to take note that when sending these queries to the tenderer, you have to ensure that tenderers are not being given an opportunity to resubmit their tender. Therefore, queries must be worded in a way that the tenderers are restricted with their response. Join me next on Silver Screen for the third installment of our tender process episode, where we will discuss the assessment of tender and preparation of tender report. Please support this channel by hitting like on the video, sharing the video to your friends, especially those who are preparing for APC. And if you haven't done yet, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you for watching and see you next episode.